one more session in the Lockdown and Civil Liberties PUCL series. Today we are going to release and discuss the report prepared by Geeta Seshu and others. It is called The Double Siege: News Media in the Time of COVID-19. And welcome to all of you, but particularly welcome to Sevanti Nainan, who will be in discussion with Geeta on the report, and to all the friends and well-wishers and citizens who have joined. So, Geeta, let's start with a summary of the report.
Uh, Thank you for agreeing to speak at this for this report and give it some kind of a larger framework that we have looked at. This report actually uh, originated with a discussion in the PUCL on the status of civil liberties across the board because of the lockdown. And we are looking at, we've already done one session on the prisons and the condition of prisoners during this lockdown. We're also looking at public health. We're looking at this condition of migrant workers and education, which is the next session which will follow. So while we were discussing all this, a lot of our concern was about the media and how the media was covering the lockdown, how the media was able to respond to the new um, need of the hour, which was really to scrutinize the way the government was unrolling the lockdown and the way it, the kind of problems that citizens were facing, the public health issues. So all of this. Now, while we started to do this, of course, and look at media coverage, the other issue that came up almost immediately was the way in which journalists were losing jobs and the media was under attack even from within. So part of the reason why this report has been entitled The Double Siege is really to reflect these two aspects of the media. One is, of course, the very, very high expectations that people would have of news media in any democracy, that it should disseminate information, it should have accurate, verified information. It is expected to scrutinize government, corporates, scrutinize anything in the public interest. It also shapes public opinion. There's this very lovely quote from Arthur Miller in the 1960s, which says, "A good newspaper is a nation having a conversation with itself." And as all of you would remember, for the first few weeks of the lockdown, we didn't even have newspapers. We didn't even, for the first time perhaps, there was this long period when we were not able to even access the news through the newspapers. So, in any case, the report also goes into the fact that there are a lot of important issues: the silence on the plight of migrant workers, the crises in public health care, the manner in which some pharma companies were getting some kind of support from the very substantial support from the government, the PM Care Fund, the Galwan crisis, which came up in the middle, the domicile law in Kashmir, the foisting of cases against the victims and rights activists in the Delhi violence. All of this, the environmental regulations. So there's a long list of things that the media ought to have been telling us about and informing us and uh, helping shape public opinion on all of this. But as all of us know, and in fact, one of the big issues which I really wanted to say right at the beginning, Rajni, was that it was extremely difficult to write a report where almost everyone has an opinion media and a big and strong opinion about the media. So I had a lot of inputs from others who wanted various things added into this report. Which is of course great, but it becomes very difficult to write the report finally. In any case, what we tried to focus on was the manner in which the state dealt with the media first. And and of course, this is not something new to many of us who work within the media. Shebanti will be able to tell us this. She's been looking at the media, scrutinizing it so closely since for the last decade and a half. Um, but over the last few years, the kind of attacks on the media has really intensified. There have been something like 200 serious attacks on journalists targeted for their investigative work. We've had journalists who've been killed. In April 2020, the Reporters Without Borders came out with its ranking, its yearly ranking, and said that India had slipped to 142 from last year's position, two places. We've had journalists who were beaten up very recently, last month, from the Caravan magazine. So, as I was saying, there is already, over the last several years, this this kind of repression on journalists. But so, in that context, when the lockdown happened, without hardly any warning, or barely about a few hours, one of the first things that we found is that the Prime Minister had decided to ask owners and editors to ensure that they carried positive stories and to ensure in some ways that what the government probably assumed would happen in terms of the reaction would be muted in some way or the other. Now, subsequently, we've had a Supreme Court order in the Alok Srivastava petition, which adopted a status report from the government, pretty much said that the exodus of migrant laborers, which almost started almost immediately after March 25th, was triggered due to panic created by fake, misleading news and social media. And the government, the status report actually recommended that the media publish only uh, anything that gets an official clearance. Fortunately for us, the court did not agree to this pre-vetting of news reports, and we were spared the horror of the emergency to some extent. But it did say that it did direct the media to refer and publish the official version about the development of various states came out with. Essentially, to say that the media should not cover anything or there should be some kind of restriction on the social media reports or anything. The government, of course, got a lot of power to be able to, a lot of legitimacy to be able to do something like this because of the Supreme Court proceedings that I referred to earlier, which was essentially that it adopted a status report uh, which said that the exodus of migrant workers was because of the fake and misleading news on social media. Now, what happened because of this is the Supreme Court referred to Section 54 of the Disaster Management Act, which penalizes anyone who circulates a false alarm or warning or a disaster as to the disaster, its severity or magnitude. Now, none of this has ever been really questioned, and a lot of people accepted the the fact that this was needed in and the Disaster Management Act um, had to be made use of. But in the process, what also happened is that various state administrations across the board got the message to be able to crack down on media persons and actually ended up arresting, detaining, interrogating journalists who put out news of migrant workers having problems accessing any kind of food or assistance or anything else and not being able to get any help to migrant workers despite the administration saying or claiming that they were getting a lot of this kind of help. And some of the kind of action by the administration was extremely you know excessive in many ways. I'll give you a few examples, and the report also speaks of a few examples. There's this journalist from the Andamans called Zubair Ahmed who tweeted that he basically tweeted to the uh, Andaman's administration asking why families are placed under home quarantine for speaking over the phone with COVID patients. That's all his tweet was. Apparently, there was a news item about how somebody rang up a relative who had been quarantined because he was tested positive with COVID, and that's all the journalist did. He was in jail. He was in. He's now on interim bail. His phone had been taken away from him. All his phone data was copied. So a lot of this happened in the first few weeks of the pandemic. And there are, of course, many other instances. There was the instance of the Wire editor, Siddharth Vardarajan, being summoned to UP over a tweet. There was Priya Sharma of the Scroll who was asked to explain about, there was an FIR against one of the stories that she wrote. There was a journalist from Coimbatore, Arul Das, who I quoted saying that he was picked up and made to sit in the police station for 9 hours. And he says we were not interrogated, just made to sit there. And now there's an air of fear in the local media because journalists are really scared to cover the news relating to the pandemic. So there are many, many such instances, and inevitably, a lot of the journalists who perhaps worked in smaller newspapers, who put out their news on Facebook, on social media, were targeted. We had some journalists from the Himachal, for instance, who had multiple FIRs lodged against them. So the administration is obviously jittery. The administration is obviously, was obviously trying to see that everything was under control. It was normal. All this desire to regulate all the news that came out in those first few crucial weeks and months of the lockdown. Along with this, what also happened is that because of this kind of censorious climate, almost all other news was also affected. And like I said earlier, journalists have always been struggling, and especially over the last few years, have been struggling to put out information at huge risk to their life. And journalists have lost their lives covering a lot of corruption, sand mining, or any other kinds of illegal activity. Journalists have been arrested. We've had websites blocked. Journalists in Kashmir in the last few months were picked up for interrogation. So, this was already a bad situation. And I just wanted to remind everyone that when this ranking came out, when the RSF came out with its ranking, the person who took the most objection to it was the INB Minister Prakash Javadekar, who said the media has the power to inform and enlighten people. Media in India enjoy absolute freedom. And he said that we will expose these surveys that portray a bad picture about freedom of the press in India. So so even with this kind of jittery reaction to any kind of international criticism of the condition of journalists and media, especially in India, the government still, of course, continues to go ahead with a lot of its activities, despite saying all of this. One of the things I want to bring out is that it's not just about the media. The right of all citizens to access information is active. Satark Nagrik Sangatna has put out this very interesting study of, and they've been monitoring, of course, the information commissions, and found that during the lockdown, as many as 21 out of 29 commissions didn't hold any hearings. And the post of the Chief Information Commissioner fell vacant a few days ago. And this was the fifth time in the last 6 years that the commission is headless. So there are about 35,000 appeals and complaints pending with this commission, where citizens have to wait for months to get any kind of information. And interestingly, I checked whether the media covered this important development, and apparently hardly anyone from the media picked it up or wrote about it. Maybe barely about two or three news media sites actually highlighted this. And I suppose if it's the fifth time that this has happened, it kind of gets normalized, and that's what happens with the media. Now, now, the other question, of course, is the second part of the report, which is that the media is weakened from within. And what actually happens is there are really two, three things which I highlighted. One of them is the fact that there is a lot of self censorship within the media. Now, we don't have as much data as we would like to have on self censorship. We need to have a lot more actual instances where journalists do come and speak out. And unfortunately, we don't have as much of that as we should. I could just point out a few things. Journalists who have been speaking out after experiencing some kind of clampdown from within. One very interesting you know thing that happened was on August 10th, the Times of India had an editorial on its third edit, and usually, uh, the third edit is usually meant to be the satirical edit, but it was actually a rebuttal to their own editorial, which was published on August 6th, of the Delhi police picking up or asking Professor Apurvanand to explain various things and questioning him for the in connection with the Delhi riots. So the editorial was quite critical, and the Delhi police then sent out this rebuttal, which was published on the on the edit page. I don't recall any instance of this something like this happening before, where the newspaper actually publishes the government's the police or the government or any agency of the government on its edit page in this manner. So there is this very insidious kind of self censorship that is definitely happening within the media. Now, the other thing, of course, is the way in which the media is seen as being extremely partisan in the way it covers very important incidents. And one of them, of course, was the coverage of the Tablighi Jamaat and the kind of demonizing across the board of the Tablighi Jamaat, and the kind of propaganda that they were responsible for spreading the virus, the followers of the Tablighi Jamaat. So, the report also speaks about that. The report also goes into the manner in which sections of the media again um, try to try to present in a very very snarky, very insidious way this kind of campaign that the lynching in Palghar, which is closer to home for us in Maharashtra, was because of either Christian missionaries or ultra leftists. That's what the Times Now did, and of course the Republic. So so there is this huge battle from within by the partisan media and by media that claims to do journalism, but actually, you know, does not follow many of the principles that one would uphold as journalistic. Now, in that situation, we also have the third problem, which is really of the media as a business and the job losses in the media, the manner in which the media unleashed this kind of bloodbath, getting rid of scores of journalists, very with hardly any kind of legal or ethical principles, completely gave it the go by. So that is also what the report looks at in some detail. And I don't know how much time I have, so I don't want to go into that, and I hope people will be able to read it. But I just wanted to point out that the reason why this becomes important is that two things really. One is that the state, one expects the state to step in to protect the rights of working journalists, and also the judiciary, both of which has not happened. One also expects the media to fulfill its responsibility to cover the, the condition of workers, but there is hardly any. And there have been a lot of reports on migrant workers, on the plight of migrant workers, and the plight of the marginalized. There have been a few reports. There's hardly any scrutiny of the structural reasons why there is this really dismal situation. There is hardly any scrutiny of why we've had public health collapse so much in this country. So, when there is no scrutiny from within, when the media is weakened from within, it simply cannot um, even shine a spotlight on anything else on the rest of society. I'll end here for now, and I'd just like to say that as I end, that while we do have a lot of questions, the pandemic is supposed to have given us this new normal. It's supposed to have taught us to re examine so much about our personal lives, ecology, professional engagements, even political interpersonal relationships, all of this. But I don't think we have been able to even examine how we can look at independent media or seek independent media that will actually help us to re-examine a new future. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Yeah.